I'm going to be talking about Hang Lee. And if you haven't heard of her story, stay tuned and I will tell you about it. So this missing story here I wanted to share with you, and why it's so special is that we as a Hmong community don't get a lot of media attention. So I wanted to shed light and also reshare their story so that people don't forget, and then maybe one day the family and the victim will get justice. So Hang Lee, she was born on October 5th, 1975. She was born to a Hmong refugee family. They came and settled in St. Paul, Minnesota. She grew up in the McDonough home neighborhoods. And as she grew up, she tried her best to kind of go to school and come home and help the family out. As she got older into her teens, she did kind of get with some bad influences. I believe what I read in my research is a little bit of like people who were on drugs or selling drugs. But she, sooner or later, towards closer to her high school graduation, she did become more stable and secure. She held a job at a Chinese restaurant called Wong Cafe, and I will show you. Wong Cafe was a Chinese restaurant off of Rice Street in St. Paul. Although she was able to secure a job at Wong Cafe, they were only paying her about $6 to $7 minimum wage, so it wasn't a lot of money. So she was kind of looking for something else to make a little bit more money. So along comes her friend Nikki, who works at a small paint business owned by this guy here, by Stephen Wallace. Mark Stephen Wallace was a paint business owner who had claimed that he needed more workers and hoped that Nikki could find some help. Well, Nikki, as a great employer, decided that yes, she does have a friend. So her friend was Hang Lee. She told her friend Hang Lee that Mark would be able to pay her a little bit more and that he's ready for a job interview, and Nikki can take her to him to complete a job interview. Hang Lee was super excited. On January 12th, 1993, on a wintry, snowy evening at 6 p.m., Hang Lee, before she left her home, she turned her back from the door and told her brother that if she does not come home, to look for her. Her brother didn't think much of it, but who knew how tragic that phrase would be to this day to her and her family. A couple days later, her family did not hear back from her. So they called the cops to make a report. The cops did not file a missing report until a couple days later, as they claimed that it could have been a runaway. As during that time frame, there was a lot of runaway teenagers and a lot of really sketchy gangsters happening, a lot of sketchy crimes occurring during that time frame. And the families were really concerned that it wasn't a runaway, with no sign of her return, and the family finding that she had left her wallet and her clothes back at home just made them really suspicious, and that they were afraid that she was not a runaway, that something bad really did happen to her. So they recalled the cops, and the law enforcement finally made a missing report and opened an investigation. Part of the law enforcement's first investigation was to talk to the people who last saw her, and the last people who saw her was none other than who? One of her friends, Nikki. Unfortunately, there is no photo of her. There is no record of her, and this is just the name that she goes by, Nikki. So I just wrote Nikki as in friend. And the other person who was last seen with her would have been Mark. So these two people are the key witnesses to have seen Hang. Now it gets really sketchy. Because when law enforcement came to go and visit Nikki's first story was that Miss Hang Lee had left on her own accord after that night of January 12th, 1993. She left with a bunch of men, and Nikki left her with the men. That was her story. Then, a couple weeks later, this friend Nikki recanted the story about leaving her friend to a bunch of men. Instead, her story was that Mark here, Mr. Mark here, told her to lie about the bunch of men. And the truth is that Nikki left Miss Hang Lee with this man, Mark, before she left home. And that's the end of the story for Nikki. Since then, Nikki has been non-cooperative, and she has lawyered up. So she has no further information to report. This is a horrible friend, okay? I'm going to tell you right now. Never, ever, ever, if you have a friend like this, you better cut them loose quick, okay? Aren't you worried of where she is? Wouldn't you want to cooperate with the cops? But like I said, Nikki is basically out of the story after the cops went to see her for the second time, like I said, because she lawyered up. Nikki, wherever you are, I think you are one of the witnesses, key to Hang Lee's missing case. And it would be, honestly, it would be important for you to say the truth. Tell the truth about what really did happen that night and what you really know. After the cops decided to, talk to Nikki, and Nikki no longer wanted to cooperate, they went to, obviously, the person of interest, the suspect that they believe has something to do with the missing of Hang Lee, Mark. When they spoke to Mark claims that after the job interview, Mark had decided to drop her off at the Wok Cafe, which was the Chinese restaurant on Rice Street, because that's where she wanted to be dropped off. I don't really understand how that makes any sense. Why you would drop off anybody at a random restaurant. Well, I mean, at a restaurant, it's late at night, when you could be dropping her off at home. He's lying. Okay. But this guy here, like I said, he is, so he was being interviewed, and he says that he knows nothing about her. Nothing at all after the job interview. Okay, so I wanted to mention one thing is that Nikki did say that was really interesting, although she's out of the picture now on her own accord, is that usually Mark drives a white pickup truck, but for some reason that night he decided to drive a car that was similar to a 1998 Chevrolet. So, person of interest driving Chevrolet with Miss Hang Lee in there. And that was the last time Nikki claims that Nikki saw them both. This vehicle has never been found. So, now that you know that the cops did the investigation, he is not talking anymore. He says he doesn't know anything about Hang Lee. I want to give you a little backstory about this guy here. Mark Stephen Wallace is a registered sex offender since the 1980s. He was convicted of 2 charges of rape and kidnapping back in the 1980s. He got off, and obviously he found himself in the Ramsey County, St. Paul area. In 2018, there was a criminal complaint that was made on him. What had happened was that he had ran a traffic stop light and fled the scene. Therefore, there was a warrant out for his arrest. Then there was evidence that showed that he was living in a hotel. So therefore, law enforcement went to the hotel and found him at a hotel with a little surprise. Guess what that surprise is? A 20-year-old girl who looked like she was in fear for her life. They spoke to her and made sure she was okay. And she had said that when she found out that Mark Wallace was a person of interest in Hang Lee's case, she had asked him about it. And he answered. And his answer was, she came into my business and she never left. And also, if you do anything, I know how to clean blood and how to cut bone through bone. This 20-year-old girl, after that, was fearful of her life. She already reported to the cops that she was physically and verbally abused. She didn't mention sexually abused, but as a registered sex offender, I'm not surprised that she wasn't just a sexual assault victim as well. Lo and behold, this story obviously did open up the case again to try to seek some answers, but Mark Wallace obviously sought out his lawyer and lawyered up as well and had nothing to say about it. After that, he was unable to pay for his home and the home went to foreclosure. And one of the sergeants from Ramsey County had been able to execute a search warrant for his home. And he went back to the home 3 times. 3 different times with dogs to smell for any human remains. He even drilled a hole in a garage. Unfortunately, there was no evidence showing human remains. And the cops in Ramsey County went back to square one. And so after all this, I thought to myself, now I understand why detectives and cops get so frustrated and they go so hard on these cases, because they invest so much in it. And you want these cases solved and you want to give justice. You want answers for these cases, and when you don't get answers, it becomes kind of you can go kind of insane. You can kind of go get obsessed about it. But it's like a race car track that you go in circles and in circles and going faster and faster, and it goes nowhere. Okay, so this is where you have to start thinking, and how I started thinking. What do I think happened? In order for me to know what I thought that happened, I wanted to get a census of what other people were thinking. And this is actually interesting. One theory was that, yes, she was a runaway, and she decided to go and meet with the friends that she had a bad influence on, that were a bad influence on her, and then they must have raped her and then killed her, so she wouldn't talk. And so then it was a cover-up, and her friend was probably threatened to keep her mouth shut in order for her to, so she wouldn't be harmed. That theory, I don't think that it can stand, because the family already stated that that she was straying away from them already by that time, and seeking stability and looking to move on to college to the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And there is no record that really does show that both her and the friend Nikki had any affiliation with any gangs at all. So personally for me, I threw that theory out the door. The only other theory, second one that I could think of, would be the suspect is Mark's Mark Wallace. Because, first of all, he has a pattern and he has a history of rape and kidnapping. There was a criminal complaint that he did lure a girl back to his house. And he did rape her and kidnap her and duct tape her. And she was able to get away. And I think that kind of behavior can take up that kind of pattern is a huge red flag. And we should be focused on him. And he knows more than what he's leading on. And that's why he's keeping quiet. So if you know anything, any new information, you can call the Ramsey County Hotline at 651-266-5903. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time, and I do hope that this family will receive some justice for Miss Hang Lee. Get some answers at least. If you have any other interest in other stories that's similar to this that hasn't been shed light on, definitely send me a message and comment below and let me know. And I'll look into it, and I definitely will use, this platform to shed light into these kinds of stories that don't get told enough, for sure. But thank you for joining me.